Right now, as you're watching this, there is a 48-hour countdown running, and nobody in Washington seems to know what happens when it hits zero. Here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. In the last 6 hours alone, 3 things happened simultaneously. Iran publicly defied a direct presidential ultimatum. An Iranian ballistic missile struck a location that nobody expected it to reach, and the United States quietly handed Tehran a $14 billion lifeline in the middle of an active conflict. Not decades ago. Not during a different administration. Today. I have been analyzing geopolitical conflicts for years, and I will tell you honestly, the pattern I am seeing right now is one of the most dangerous I have tracked. If you are not subscribed to this channel yet, do it right now, because what I am about to show you in the next 20 minutes does not exist anywhere else. Before we go any further, I need to set the table. Because if you walk into this analysis without understanding the full board, you are going to miss what is actually happening here. Most coverage right now is treating this like a two-sided conflict, the United States versus Iran. But that framing is dangerously incomplete. What we are actually looking at is a 5-dimensional chess match with 5 completely separate sets of interests sitting at the same table. You have Washington, you have Tehran, you have Tel Aviv, you have the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, who are American allies but are now hemorrhaging $2.3 billion every single day because of disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz. And then you have a 5th player that almost nobody is talking about loudly enough, but I will get to that shortly. Now let me give you the timeline, because the speed of escalation here is something you need to feel, not just understand intellectually. The United States and Israel struck Iran's Natanz nuclear facility. Iran responded by launching medium-range ballistic missiles into southern Israel, hitting Dimona, which is where Israel's nuclear infrastructure is based. Trump posted a public ultimatum threatening to obliterate Iran's energy infrastructure within 48 hours. Iran's parliament chief responded with a meme. And in the middle of all of this, Washington lifted oil sanctions on Iran, allowing $14 billion to flow directly into Tehran's economy within 24 hours. $28 billion spent by the United States, $2.3 billion lost by Gulf allies every single day, $14 billion handed to the opposing side. Do you see what is happening here? Pause for a moment, because I need you to sit with one question before we go deeper. If this is what winning looks like after 2 weeks, what does 2 months look like? Let us talk about the ultimatum, because I want to go through it word by word, not to make a political point, but because the language itself tells you something very important about the strategic position of the person who wrote it. Here is what was posted publicly, and I am quoting directly. If Iran doesn't fully open without threat the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours from this exact point in time, the United States of America will hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first. Thank you for your attention to this matter. I need you to understand something. That last line, thank you for your attention to this matter, that is the language of a strongly worded letter to a contractor who missed a deadline. That is not the language of a commander-in-chief managing an active military conflict in one of the most strategically critical waterways on the planet. But here is where it gets significantly more serious. And I want you to zoom in with me for just a moment. The threat is not against military infrastructure. The explicit target is power plants, energy facilities, civilian infrastructure, under Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions. And I am not here to render a legal verdict. I am asking you to consider the question. Deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure during armed conflict raises serious questions under international humanitarian law. This is not a fringe interpretation. This is something legal scholars at institutions like the International Committee of the Red Cross have written extensively about. Now zoom back out, because Iran's response to this ultimatum was not silence. It was not a diplomatic back-channel communication. Iran's response was a meme posted publicly by the head of their parliament. The meme read, "Sorry, we are sold out," mocking the sanctions relief, mocking the Treasury Secretary, mocking the entire framework of American leverage. Do you understand what that signal means strategically? When a country that is actively engaged in a military conflict with the world's most powerful military stops to post a meme, that is a deliberate psychological operation. That is a government communicating to its own population, to the region, and to the international community that it does not feel threatened, that it feels confident, that it believes time is on its side. And then came the counterstrike declaration. Iran's armed forces spokesperson stated publicly, if the United States and Israel attack Iranian energy infrastructure, there will be immediate retaliatory strikes on the energy infrastructure of every Arab nation allied with the United States. Desalination plants, power grids, information technology infrastructure, in a region where several nations depend entirely on desalination for their fresh water supply. That is not a military threat. That is an existential one. So here is where we are. An ultimatum was issued. It was publicly mocked. A counterstrike framework was publicly announced. And the 48-hour clock is running. I want you to hold that thought. Because the next question, the one that nobody in mainstream coverage is asking directly, is this. Who is actually being rewarded by this escalation? And the answer is going to surprise you. Let me put two numbers side by side, and I want you to just sit with them for a moment before I explain anything. $1.4 billion and $14 billion. The first number is the maximum figure associated with sanctions relief under the Iran nuclear agreement negotiated during the Obama administration, a deal that was relentlessly attacked, misrepresented, and ultimately abandoned. The second number is how much Iranian oil revenue was unlocked by the United States government within a single 24-hour period in the middle of an active military conflict against the same country. I am not here to tell you what to think about that. I am here to make sure you are looking directly at it. Now, here's where the economics become genuinely difficult to explain using conventional logic. The stated objective of this military campaign, as far as any objective has been publicly articulated, includes degrading Iranian power and leverage. But lifting oil sanctions does the precise opposite. It injects capital directly into the Iranian economy at a moment when that economy should theoretically be under maximum pressure. Iran's parliament is not hiding their reaction. The response was public mockery. Thank you. You are giving us things we did not even ask for. So the question I want you to ask yourself is not a partisan one. It is a structural one. Who benefits from sustained instability in the Strait of Hormuz? Let us follow the money carefully. Iran benefits directly. Sanctions relief plus a chokehold on global shipping plus bilateral deals with India and Japan. Tehran is generating revenue and diplomatic leverage simultaneously. Russia benefits enormously. Oil prices surge when Middle East supply routes are disrupted. Every dollar added to the price of a barrel of crude flows directly into Moscow's budget at a moment when Russian energy exports are already under separate pressure. And then there are the commodity traders, the hedge funds, the financial instruments built specifically to profit from energy price volatility. Instability is not a problem for these players. Instability is the product. Now zoom in with me to something that affects you directly, not as a political observer, as someone who buys things. When Gulf countries lose $2.3 billion per day in economic disruption, that cost does not disappear. It moves. It travels through supply chains, through shipping insurance premiums, through fuel surcharges, through the price of every imported good that touched a container ship in the last 30 days. The inflation you feel at the register is not abstract. It has a geographic origin point. And right now, that origin point is a waterway between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. The United States has already spent an estimated $28 billion on this conflict. Gulf allies are losing $2.3 billion daily, and Iran just received $14 billion in unlocked revenue. Pause, breathe, and think about what that balance sheet actually says. I am not drawing a conclusion for you, but I am going to ask you the question that serious analysts are beginning to ask privately. If the economic outcomes of this conflict are consistently benefiting the designated adversary, at what point does that stop being a paradox and start being a pattern? Hold that question, because what I am about to show you next is the part of this story that almost no one is covering, and it may be the most consequential piece of the entire puzzle. I told you at the beginning of this video there was something most channels are missing. This is it. Everyone is watching the Strait of Hormuz, and they should be. But while every camera, every analyst, every breaking news Chiron is pointed at that single choke point, there is a second choke point sitting quietly in the background, loaded, waiting, and according to the people who control it, waiting on a single order, the Red Sea. Let me give you the geography first because it matters enormously. Approximately 12% of all global trade passes through the Red Sea every single year. That includes a significant portion of European energy imports, Asian manufacturing exports, and consumer goods moving between continents. The Suez Canal, which feeds directly from the Red Sea, is one of the 2 or 3 most strategically critical maritime passages on the entire planet. If the Strait of Hormuz is a pressure valve on global energy markets, the Red Sea is a pressure valve on global trade itself. And the Houthis in Yemen control the southern entrance. Now, here is the detail I need you to focus on very carefully. The Houthis have been largely quiet during this conflict, and the natural assumption, the lazy assumption, is that they are quiet because they are constrained, because American military pressure has limited their capacity. But that is not what Houthi leadership is actually saying publicly. What they are saying is something far more deliberate. They are saying they are waiting for the order. Think about what that framing does strategically. It is not a confession of limitation. It is a declaration of restraint. There is an enormous psychological difference between cannot and choosing not to. One signals weakness. The other signals control. And Iran and the Houthis are very deliberately projecting the second message to every government, every shipping company, and every energy market currently watching this situation. This is escalation dominance through the threat of escalation, not the escalation itself. Now, let me give you the specific numbers so you understand exactly what the activation of this card would mean in practical terms. Energy analysts have suggested that a coordinated closure of both the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea simultaneously could push oil prices beyond $150 per barrel in the short term. Some projections under sustained closure scenarios go significantly higher. We are currently already seeing upward pressure on oil prices from Hormuz disruption alone. The Red Sea remains the unused reserve, the card that has not been played. And here is what makes this moment particularly dangerous. Iran is not operating this leverage recklessly. They are operating it with precision. They allowed an Indian cargo vessel safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz for a reported fee of $2 million. They are in active discussions with Japan about similar arrangements. Iran is not just blocking a waterway. Iran is administering one. That is a fundamentally different exercise of power. That is sovereignty being demonstrated in real time through economic control rather than military conquest. So when you hear the 48-hour ultimatum and you wonder what Iran's actual leverage looks like in response, now you know. The Strait of Hormuz is the card on the table. The Red Sea is the card still in their hand. And the question that should concern every person watching this right now is very simple. What happens if they decide to play it? This is the part where I want to slow down deliberately, because everything I am about to say requires precision. And I want to be very clear about the difference between what we can observe and what we can only theorize. There are two serious analytical frameworks being discussed right now in foreign policy circles. And I think you deserve to hear both of them, not the one that confirms whatever you already believe. The first framework is the one that is most visible, that what we are witnessing is genuine strategic disorientation. The signals supporting this reading are not subtle. According to reporting from Axios, and yes, this administration leaks selectively, so wait that accordingly, people inside the Trump government do not currently have clarity on who the legitimate negotiating counterpart in Iran even is. The foreign minister is refusing contact. Back-channel attempts have been rebuffed repeatedly. Iran's position, stated publicly by Foreign Minister Araghchi, is that no conversation is possible without reparations and binding security guarantees. That is not an opening position in a negotiation. That is a door being closed. Meanwhile, the Cato Institute, not a left-leaning organization, published analysis stating that after more than 2 weeks of sustained bombing, Iran's regime is actually consolidating power internally. The Islamic Republic is not fracturing under pressure. It is hardening. Now, here's the second framework, and I want you to take it seriously, even if it makes you uncomfortable. It is called the madman theory. It was deliberately employed by the Nixon administration during the Vietnam era. The core logic is this: if your adversary believes you are unpredictable enough to do something catastrophic, they may alter their behavior to avoid triggering that outcome. Erratic public statements, extreme ultimatums, deliberate ambiguity about red lines, these are not bugs in this theory. They are the features. The problem, and this is the critical analytical question, is that the madman theory only generates the desired outcome if the adversary believes the madman will actually follow through. And Iran's behavior right now suggests one of two things. Either they do not believe the follow-through is coming, or they believe they can absorb it and emerge stronger. Both of those conclusions represent a serious erosion of deterrence credibility. Now look at what America's allies are doing. Japan's prime minister visited Washington and left with what appears to be a quiet understanding about sourcing energy arrangements that root around American policy preferences. India completed a negotiated passage through the Strait of Hormuz with Iranian naval escort. These are not adversaries hedging. These are allies hedging. When your allies start making separate arrangements with your designated enemy during an active conflict, that is a signal worth taking very seriously. The question is no longer simply what Trump is doing. The deeper question is whether anyone on the opposing side is afraid of the answer. I want to take a step back from the immediate noise for a moment, because I think the most valuable thing I can offer you right now is not another recap of today's headlines. It is the three questions that serious analysts are asking privately, and that you are almost certainly not hearing asked publicly. Question 1. If the stated objective of this military campaign includes preventing Iranian nuclear capability, then why does Iran currently possess more enriched uranium than it did before the first strike landed? That is not a political talking point. That is a material fact about the physical inventory of fissile material that international inspectors were tracking before access was disrupted. The gap between the stated goal and the measurable outcome on that specific metric alone is worth sitting with. Question 2. Who has formally defined what victory looks like in this conflict? And has that definition been made public? Because without a publicly articulated and verifiable end state, there is no framework for evaluating progress. And without a framework for evaluating progress, every claim of success and every accusation of failure is essentially unfalsifiable. That is not a condition that produces accountability. That is a condition that produces indefinite engagement. Question 3. Gulf countries are American allies. They are losing $2.3 billion every single day as a direct consequence of Hormuz disruption. At what point does that daily loss create sufficient internal political pressure that those governments begin pursuing their own exit from alignment with current American strategy? We are already seeing early signals. The question is not whether that pressure exists. The question is how long before it produces a visible fracture. Now, let me give you the historical context, because I am not going to tell you history repeats itself, but I will tell you it rhymes consistently enough to be useful. Iraq, 2003. No publicly defined exit strategy. No clear post-war governance framework. Stated objectives achieved rapidly. And then the situation deteriorated across a decade and a half. Afghanistan, 20 years. The Taliban govern Kabul today. I am not drawing a direct equivalence. I am pointing at a structural pattern. Military operations without clearly articulated, measurable, publicly accountable end states have a consistent historical tendency toward indefinite extension. And here's the thing I most want you to take away from this entire analysis. You do not have to care about the political identity of any actor in this conflict to be affected by its outcome. The price of energy does not check your voter registration. Supply chain disruption does not ask your opinion of any administration. What happens in that waterway touches your life in ways that are concrete, measurable, and arriving faster than most people realize. That is why this matters, not because of who is winning the news cycle, because of what comes next for everyone watching. So let us bring this to a point. The Strait of Hormuz remains under Iranian operational control. The Red Sea card has not been played. American allies are making separate arrangements with the designated adversary. The 48-hour clock is running, and nobody has publicly defined what the exit looks like. The question I am leaving you with today is not about Trump. It is not about Iran. It is this: if neither side has a visible path to resolution, what actually stops this? If this analysis gave you something that the mainstream coverage did not, hit that like button right now, not for me, because the algorithm uses that signal to push this kind of independent analysis toward people who genuinely need to understand what is happening. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because I promise you within 48 hours, something significant is going to move, and you want to hear it from here first. Stay sharp. I will see you the moment it breaks.